That music can only mean one thing. Dr. Nancy Irwin is back on the Z-Waves. One-time stand-up comedian, one-time classical opera singer, now a therapist in Los Angeles. Good afternoon.
I'm great. How are you, Mike? Nice to be back.
Oh, it's good to talk to you again. It's been too long. I'm sorry we haven't talked sooner. We have all these high school games we broadcast during the spring months. But here you are now. And I promised people, we chatted before, that you were going to talk about the aftermath of the Sandusky trial, because you have an abiding interest and you do a lot of work in that area.
Yes, indeed. One of my areas of concentration is I work with sex offenders and, of course, victims of child sexual abuse as well. So I'm hoping that this case can be sort of a learning tool for all of us, especially people out there who don't know that treatment does work for pedophilia. The common man tends to think, and woman, urban myth has it that, their recidivism rate, meaning their repeat crimes, are about 90%. Once a pedophile, always a pedophile.
Yes.
And while part of that is true, there is no cure for it, but it certainly can be managed. I always make the analogy of alcoholism. We can't really cure alcoholics, but they can certainly be in recovery and manage it and stay sober for the rest of their lives.
True.
Well, pedophiles can do the same thing. Child molesters, actually all sex offenders. Pedophiles is only one small portion of that. But certainly they can, but it takes awareness and asking for help. So, as heinous and extensive as the, alleged crimes were with this Sandusky guy at Penn State, my heart kind of goes out to him. He probably did not know where to turn for help, if indeed he ever wanted it.
Well, if I may, let me ask you this, because you've dealt with sex offenders as well as the victims. Am I right in believing, from what we've gotten from the media, Sandusky has not admitted any guilt and sort of still maintains his innocence even at this point?
And I have a feeling it's because of his age, and he knows he's going to be probably in prison for life, and that's the sentence he got, unless there is an appeal and that is changed. At that stage of the game, they're so steeped in denial.
Okay.
So that's why I hope, broadcasts like this can reach some of the younger people before their patterns are as long and deeply ingrained, and they can begin to ask for help.
Okay.
So
it's not
and turn it around. Yeah.
It is not typical necessarily that somebody is in so much denial as he is.
It does happen quite a bit, but once they're with a younger person, when they're arrested, that can be the very best thing, of course, for victims and for them, because through treatment, many times, most of the time, they do break through the denial or the minimization of their crimes, and they're able to see what set them up to commit it. Maybe they were molested. Maybe they didn't have the proper sexual instruction and social skills, et cetera, when they were coming along. I mean, the research is not conclusive yet, but there's certainly a lot of research that is leading to the fact it may be a genetic marker. It certainly can be, and I would not put anything past it, just like with alcoholism. Although, of course, it can be a learned behavior and a coping mechanism. That definitely can be dealt with. Either way, again, treatment works. Believe it or not, when there is treatment, the repeat crime rates are only between about 5 and 13% for all sex crimes.
I see.
I know. People don't want to let that in. They want to think, once a pervert, always a pervert.
Exactly. Lock them up and throw away the key.
Exactly. And I really think compassion and understanding are important. I mean, punishment, yeah. But understanding, treatment, compassion, and understanding are what we need to help deal with this, because what affects any of us affects all of us.
Yes.
And if we start treating the pedophiles, then they're much less victims to have to worry about later on.
And that's a very good point, certainly.
Absolutely. So, I'd like to put out a couple of resources. So if there are people listening and they have a loved one or they themselves are struggling with this issue and they feel like there's no place to turn, there are a couple of places that you can check out. They're both extremely reputable, and confidentiality will be honored. And that's Stop It Now, just like it sounds, Stop It Now, ! I think they're in Vermont or New Hampshire, someplace up in the Northeast. Stop It Now is a fabulous organization. And also another one that is Before You Act, and that's the letter B, and then the number 4, the letter U, Act. and it's just what it says. They want to treat people who believe they're attracted to who are attracted to minors, and treat them before they act upon it.
And people can find these on the web?
Absolutely.
And,
stop it now and before you act.
And as you said, confidentiality is respected.
Of course. And actually, if you go to any therapist, confidentiality is honored. The only time, and this is what scares people who are attracted to minors and afraid to admit it, is they feel like they're going to be arrested. Well, you're not arrested if you tell any therapist or even a clergy person or a social worker or anyone else. You're not going to be arrested. They can't turn you in. They can't report it unless you say you've acted upon it.
But then, of course, they are bound to report that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If somebody tells me that they are going, if I really feel like they have a solid intent to molest someone, or they tell me that they have, I am mandated by California State to report that.
And then, if I may, do you tell the client that at that time then?
Yes.
Okay.
I always tell them that. In fact, that's standard for any therapist. You always tell the client, we honor confidentiality. The only time I will break that is if you tell me you're going to commit suicide or that you're going to harm someone else in any way, and especially in the case of child abuse.
I see.
Yeah.
Look, if we can back up just a little bit, are most abusers of children victims of abuse themselves? Is that true, or is that true in your experience?
Well, the current statistics are about 75% of them were sexually abused.
Wow.
I would say 100% were abused, whether it's physically, emotionally, psychologically, or they were neglected, which is a form of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Many times they were sexually abused, but they don't recognize it as such because we live in such a chauvinistic culture, and boys are socialized to get it whenever they can.
Mm-hmm.
So, perfect case in point. I haven't seen it yet, and I hate to say it, but I hope it flops. The new Adam Sandler movie, and I'm a big fan of his. I'm just really surprised he would take on this project. It's called That's My Boy. The story is he has a son. He had sex with the Adam Sandler character as a teenager in high school, had sex with his teacher, and she gave birth to the child. And then years later, he's reacquainted with that son who's grown up. Well, believe me, if the genders were switched, can you imagine how this people would have been outraged about a movie about this?
Yes.
If it had been a girl having sex with a teacher?
Yes.
Perfect case in point.
Yeah.
That goes on all the time, and boys don't report it because it's all right. It's a hot teacher.
Yes.
And that's kind of expected. Boys get it whenever they can.
It was several years ago. We had a rash of female teachers abusing their male students. And I remember that a comedian who does a lot of country jokes, I'll not name him, but says, well, if that was my boy, I'd say, all right.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a funny joke in a comedy club, but you know what? In real life, it ain't so funny.
No, not a bit.
Because, of course, the boys enjoy it at the time. Of course. In fact, some of the girls do, too. But it's like smoking. You don't see the negative effects right away. But 10, 20 years down the road, you see it. I can't tell you how many men who are in marriages or long-term relationships 20 years after that fact have intimacy issues. They can't really be emotionally close to their partners, or they have sexual dysfunctions because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. And then, of course, they see a therapist. Well, those who are enlightened enough to do that,
right.
Does it take a long time for them to discover the reason with the help of a therapist?
Sometimes it does. Sometimes they do know. Sometimes they're like, well, I'm sure this doesn't have anything to do with my issue with my wife, but this is what happened to me in high school. And I'm like, you think? Of course it can.
I see.
Of course it can, because when the inappropriate boundary is crossed, the young man pairs that with sexual excitement. So that can set up a pattern of only getting titillated by inappropriate sex. So when he's in a loving relationship with a wife and it's quote-unquote expected, he can't perform.
Yeah, I can see that. And just the very act of intimacy is going to trigger the bad memories, whether they actually come to the forefront or not.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
We can't be mixed up creatures, can't we?
We certainly can, and I would love to see sex education include issues like this and just respect for other people, as opposed to just, anatomy and biology, because there's a lot more to sexuality than just that.
And please note, listeners, that Nancy's not talking about unnatural sex, or she's talking about boundaries so that people just, as you said, respect one another.
Exactly.
Aren't children taught, though, at an early age in most sex education programs to report abuse, to recognize and report abuse? If not, they certainly should be.
Well, that can be tricky because sometimes that can be, they can have a hair trigger, and things get reported that didn't really happen.
Uh-huh.
And a good touch versus a bad touch, the line can be very blurred on that with children sometimes. You got to be very, very careful how you impart that knowledge.
Oh, I see.
I know.
Yeah.
It can be really tricky because there are a lot of false allegations.
Yes.
There certainly are. And there's a lot of very cagey teenagers who will use that false claim against older people. I know.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation. It really is.
Horrible. And sadly, that takes away from the real issues.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of work to do in this field.
Luckily, there are people out there like you who are doing such work.
Well, it's extraordinarily fulfilling, and it's really amazing to watch these sort of miracles happen, because they do, and that's what I'd love people to hear. Rather than, I hope they don't hear me defending pedophilia. I'm certainly not doing that.
I'm sure not.
Because actually I'm a survivor of adolescent sexual abuse myself. So I chose to go into this because it keeps me standing in a place of empowerment, understanding, and forgiveness, rather than hatred and bitterness.
And best too, you're helping other people.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Nancy, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Always mine.
Thank you. Bye now.